Imagine an entire century where one family lost the throne and spent generations trying to regain it, a conflict that makes any modern royal drama look like a playground game. The Jacobites weren't just rebels, they were the other British royal family, the branch of the Stuarts that never accepted defeat. This is a story of intrigue, impossible escapes, bloody battles, family crises, and nicknames that would go down in legend. We're talking about a king known as the Old Pretender, and his son, the unforgettable Bonnie Prince Charlie, figures who embodied romanticism, failure, and obsession with the crown. If you thought modern British politics was complicated, wait until you hear this. The year is 1688, and James II of England, who also holds the title of James VII of Scotland, has been on the throne for barely 3 years. His personal history was already full of dramatic twists and turns. He had been married twice. His first wife, Lady Anne Hyde, bore him 2 surviving daughters, Mary and Anne, raised from childhood as Protestants at the request of her late brother, Charles II. These princesses would be crucial to the succession, as their father, a Catholic and increasingly tolerant of his like-minded subjects, faced growing distrust in a predominantly Protestant country. After Lady Anne Hyde's death, James married Mary of Modena, another Catholic, and his prospects for heirs became more complicated. Until June 1688, the future seemed clear. Princess Mary was the heir to the throne, followed by her sister Anne. But everything changed on June 10th of that year. Queen Mary gave birth to a son, James Francis Edward Stuart, who automatically displaced the princesses in the line of succession. The prospect of a new Catholic dynasty in England and Scotland alarmed the nobility and parliament. Accusations that the child was a switched baby and had been fraudulently introduced into the birthing chamber fueled conspiracies and rumors that would give rise to the Glorious Revolution. 7 noblemen, known as the Immortal Seven, invited William of Orange, Princess Mary's husband, to invade England to protect Protestantism. James, despite having a superior army, hesitated and suffered desertions, including from his own daughter Anne and her husband. In a desperate attempt, he sent his wife and the baby to France, disguised as a washerwoman and a common boy, while he himself unsuccessfully attempted to flee, being captured and released shortly after by William. By Christmas, the family was settled in Saint-Germain-en-Laye under the protection of Louis XIV. William and Mary proclaimed themselves king and queen in the year 1689, marking the only instance in the history of the British monarchy where both shared the throne, although real power resided with William. The fall of James II and the establishment of the new monarchy gave rise to the Jacobite cause, named after the Latin form of James, Jacobus. From that moment on, James and his supporters became exiled figures, fighting to regain a throne that seemed lost. The young Prince of Wales, exiled with his family, was known as the King over the Water and became a symbol of Jacobite resistance, while the English nobility was torn between loyalty to the new regime and nostalgia for the Stuarts. James II's first serious attempt to regain the throne came with French support, establishing his base in Ireland. There he was warmly received and managed to gather troops to confront William's forces, commanded by the Duke of Schomberg. The battles were intense. The campaign culminated in the famous Battle of the Boyne in 1690. Although James had a large army, his decision to retreat and William's bravery tipped the balance in favor of the Hanoverians. James returned to France and never again set foot in the British Isles. Although his followers kept the cause alive for decades, the war in Ireland ended with the Treaty of Limerick in 1691, consolidating William's power in the region, while the Jacobites were reduced to plotting from exile. Despite initial setbacks, the Jacobite struggle continued unabated. At Saint-Germain-en-Laye, James and Mary of Modena lived in relative comfort thanks to the generosity of Louis XIV, and in 1692 they had another daughter, Princess Louise. The English aristocracy, still divided in its loyalties, continued to send secret messages of support to James and his son, although the cause suffered from a lack of resources and planning. When Mary II died of smallpox in 1694, William III continued to rule alone, consolidating the Hanoverian line and reducing the chances of a Jacobite restoration. Like and share this video with anyone you think needs to know this fact. With the death of James II in 1701, his son James III, aged just 13, was declared king by Louis XIV, who ignored the English recognition of William. Scotland and other regions remained hostile to the Hanoverians, and Anne's death in 1714 cemented the rise of George I to the British throne, a German foreigner whose arrival generated discontent and fear among James's supporters. The young James III, later known as the Old Pretender, continued to live in France and other European territories, trying to rally support for a restoration that seemed increasingly unlikely. The first significant Jacobite uprising against George I occurred in 1715. Coordinated with French troops, the rebels hoped to capitalize on English and Scottish dissatisfaction with a foreign king. However, the operation was a disaster from the start. Leaks, military incompetence, and poor leadership led to defeats in England and Scotland. The Battle of Sheriffmuir and the surrender of rebel forces at Preston marked the failure of the first major attempt at Jacobite restoration, and young James had to return to exile, his hopes of the throne growing dim. Despite the setbacks, the Jacobites continued plotting for years. The Old Pretender managed to maintain the legitimacy of his cause through strategic marriages and European alliances. In the year 1719, he married Princess Maria Clementina Sobieski, securing a new generation of Jacobites. Their son, Charles Edward, known as Bonnie Prince Charlie, was born in 1720, and later his brother, Prince Henry Benedict, in the year 1725. Both young men became romantic symbols of the Jacobite cause, representing the hope of a return to the lost throne. For the next 25 years, the Jacobites continued to plot and conspire, albeit without success. The 1715 rebellion had shown that a lack of coordination and planning could ruin any attempt at restoration, and the consolidation of the Hanoverians strengthened their hold. George I and later George II governed with relative stability, while the Jacobites maintained a symbolic and romantic presence in the collective memory, especially among university students, clergy, Irish and Scottish Catholics, as well as some disaffected Freemasons and members of the Conservative Party. James II and III and their families represented the last hope for a Catholic monarchical restoration in Britain. Their attempts, though valiant and persistent, were constantly thwarted by political, social, and military factors, favoring the Hanoverians. The Jacobite cause became a symbol of loyalty, honor, and resilience in the face of adversity, but also an example of how stubbornness and lack of pragmatism can condemn even the most determined to defeat. The generations of Jacobites that followed represented more of a romantic ideal than a real threat to the British monarchy. Their stories are full of drama, desperate escapes, invasion attempts, strategic marriages, and the constant tension between religious faith and political ambitions. Bonnie Prince Charlie, in particular, became a cultural icon, embodying his family's lost but glorious struggle. His figure inspired stories, songs, and legends that endured long beyond the Jacobites' political relevance. In the end, the story of the Jacobites teaches us that passion and loyalty, however admirable, are not always enough to change the course of history. Their saga spans a full century of intrigue, rebellion, and dashed hopes, from the Glorious Revolution to the Scottish uprisings and European conspiracies, leaving a fascinating legacy of courage, tragedy, and romance. The struggle for a lost throne, loyalty to a cause, and the complexity of 17th and 18th century European politics make the Jacobites the protagonists of one of the craziest, most intriguing, and entertaining stories in British history. Thanks for joining us this far. Subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss our next videos.